today. Our councillors are sitting down here and the people in the galleries are up at the back. First of all, we have some safety information. There is no planned fire alarm going off today, so if a fire alarm goes off, we need to leave the building. There will be a fire. The people in the galleries, they leave at the back over there through the back entrance, and we will leave through that door, and we will all move to the cathedral opposite the College Green. Any apologies and absences, please?
Yes, Chair. We have Jenny Bartle substituting for Councillor Breyer, and we have Annie Stafford-Townsend substituting for George Calzioni.
Thank you. Is there any declarations of interest from the councillors, please? Okay. Minutes of the previous meeting. I need to agree to the minutes of the previous meeting. I've read them and I agree that they are the correct record. Would anybody like to second it, please? Thank you, Richard. Action sheet. Do we have any outstanding actions?
I don't believe we do, Chair.
Thank you.
No, Chair, there's no actions.
Appeals. There was one appeal that you would like to highlight, please.
Yeah, thank you. An appeal that I just wish to highlight just is item 12, which appears in the list of appeals that are under consideration, and this is an item on page 17 of the agenda, which relates to the Keynsham Garden Centre. It's in the papers as an informal hearing, which was scheduled to take place next week, next Tuesday on the 30th of July. It was really just to update members that this appeal has been considered by the inspectorate, and they are minded to instead hear this appeal by way of a public inquiry. We were invited to give our views on this. We were of the view that hearing would be more than adequate, but we are now looking at an inquiry in relation to this appeal, which will take place in October of this year. So it was really just to highlight that, and also just to confirm that the hearing, which was due to take place next week, it won't. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Enforcements, are there any notes to take on enforcements? Sorry.
It's not particularly a question, of course. Normally I see this report as giving us a picture in time of basically the trend. Normally I'm fairly happy if broadly we actually win, or at least actually the planning inspectorate disallow 1 and 4 or more. Disallow 3 and 4. But I see that 13 are allowed here against 12 disallowed, which seems quite a high proportion. I'm not asking for a question or an answer now, but can officers please take it away and see if there's any indication why perhaps these figures are quite so bad?
Yes, we'd certainly be happy to take that away. And in fact, we've actually got some work underway at the moment just to analyse some of those appeal decisions and just to understand the trends there.
Thank you. And nothing on enforcement that you need to bring to our attention?
On that, really only just to say that, again, it's our intention for the committee in September to also provide a report on enforcement. Again, another update just in terms of the workload within the team, and just an update on where we are with the resourcing situation.
Thank you. Okay, so this time we move on to our public forum. We're allowed up to 30 minutes for this particular item, and I have a list of people that would like to speak. We have no questions this time round, so we just have statements. Now I would have to ask the public, please, to keep their statements down to 1 minute. The councillors will have read your statements before that you've submitted. if they are longer. So try and make it a summation of the points of the statements that you'd written in your papers. So there will be a light system here. It'll be green light when it starts, and then it's 30 seconds, it goes to amber, and then a red. So please keep it down to 1 minute. Sorry. Oh, okay, sorry.
Maybe speak into the microphone a bit, Jonathan.
Sorry, is that better?
Yes.
Okay, so sorry. So have you heard me at the back there about the statements, or shall I repeat myself? Understood. Thank you very much. Thank you. Sorry about that. Okay, so to start off, we have Mona Mogoharibi.
Yes, hello.
Thank you.
I'm the owner of the pub. Since the last committee meeting, the building has suffered further and extensive and repeated vandalism. For over a year, some individuals with a vendetta against me, due to my refusal to lease the pub to them for £1 a year, have been relentlessly damaging the property, breaking windows and doors as soon as they are secured. The pub has become a ghostly shell, and while the valuation office agency has refused to categorize it as a derelict building, I have been paying both council tax and business rates. Most of the public objections come from non-locals whose concerns are based on nostalgia rather than the current economic realities. To address the main objection made by the councillors that approving the proposal does not guarantee the repair and refurbishment of the pub, I am giving an undertaking.
Okay, sorry. Could you, in a minute, just sum up, but can you please not make a comment while someone else is talking? You'll have your chance for your statements as well, please. Thank you. You finished summing up?
I was going to say I am giving an undertaking that within 1 year after completion of the flats, the pub will be repaired and refurbished to a leasable condition.
Okay, thank you. All right. So, can we now have Nigel Morris, please?
Yes, I'd urge the committee to reject this planning application in its current form so that the only pub and garden in Barton Hill can be retained for the community rather than for profit. Because it is known that many property developers buy up pubs cheaply, hoping that they can profit by converting them into housing. To achieve this, they may allow properties to become deteriorated and should therefore not be rewarded by planning permission being granted, as this sets a precedent to encourage others to do the same. There have been offers to buy the pub at reasonable prices by experienced licensees, which could have prevented further deterioration, but the owners chose to hold on, hoping that they get the plans accepted. The viability report has many flaws. It's not independently verified, not relevant, didn't consider help from supporters, local builders, equipment held in storage, and crowdfunding appeals. And the space at the side of the building is also a useful asset, and the high-density housing blocks the public right-of-way.
Thank you. Okay, thank you very much. And now we move on to Leighton de Burka.
Burke isn't here.
Thank you very much. Alexandra Smith.
Hello. Though I do welcome the revisions that have been made to retain the public house building as one unit, I still hold reservations over the proposal that continues to seek to build flats in the pub garden, and I believe this plan would run contradictory to the City Council's own Keep Bristol Cool mapping tool, which acknowledges that Barton Hill is an area that is disproportionately impacted by the effects of heat waves that are being made worse by climate change, due to the lack of trees and green spaces within the neighbourhood, as well as the existing layout of the neighbourhood being very densely populated. For this reason, I believe the application should be refused to ensure that this green space can be retained not only for environmental purposes, but also to the benefit of community health and cohesion, allowing for the garden to be reopened for the community to use once again, as they have done so for many years before. Thank you.
Thank you. And now we have Teresa Smith. Not in?
No, she...
All right, thank you. Christopher Faulkner Gibson.
In the amendment sheet, the case officer states proposals to include arts, community space and live music will require planning consent for change of use. However, these would be integral to the pub operation and not actually a change of use. Many pubs operate very successfully with specialisms such as these. Yes, a lot of damage has resulted from vandalism, but little of this is structural, and most of the repair will be straightforward. The owner must not be rewarded for failing to secure the premises. Recent appeals involving Bristol pubs have been rejected by inspectors who found that very small gains in housing stock do not outweigh the loss of amenity. We disagree that housing gain must be the overriding concern, and we're confident this argument would also succeed in this case at appeal. The owner has indicated the pub will be sold if planning consent is refused, and we think this would be the best outcome given that there are local pub operators interested in taking it on. We urge the committee to refuse the application. Thank you.
Well done. Thank you. Got it in your minute. Thank you very much. Chris Goodsall. Goodsall.
I'm the architect for the project. I just want to emphasise that as far as I know, there have been no offers from experienced publicans for the premises. And if anyone does know of any experienced publicans who have got a genuine offer, then I think the client would like to hear from them. But there haven't been any offers of that sort in the last 5 years. Just to say that the viability report was prepared by planning, not by the client, and also to emphasise that the scheme does not require the loss of the pub. The client has worked very hard to try to retain the pub, having been told by the community that the pub is required. So, we're trying to develop a scheme that generates funds to refurbish the pub and get it back into action, not to lose the pub. But the development of the flats is very much required to generate those funds.
Thank you very much. Thank you. That was also in time. Tim Northover.
Local residents and ward councillors are opposed to this application, which proposes to build flats over and on top of a designated public right-of-way. There's a statutory and environmental duty to protect public rights-of-way and green spaces. We therefore urge the committee to reject and not to permit this land grab. The listed footpath runs along the public highway along to a lane that's part and adjacent to the pub garden, serves as a route to nearby residential streets. It has a public function and is public realm until it was recently illegally blocked and bricked up at the end of the lane without permission, which is itself a criminal offence. Residents have been working to tidy up the path, which the owner has completely neglected to maintain, and are liaising with both the public rights of way team and our ward councillors who are supportive of our aspirations to reinstate the path so it may be enjoyed again as part of a useful and active travel route.
Thank you very much. Thank you. So is there anyone else that's not on my list that I've not asked to talk this evening? Everybody's accounted for. Thank you very much. So we can move on to the presentation, and I believe that you will have emailed the slides to the councillors. So if they're looking at the computer, that's the reason they're doing that. They're following the slides, which will be on the screen for the public, but they will be on the screen for the councillors. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Just to check everyone can hear me. So this application was deferred at committee on the 24th of January after a vote was carried to reject the officer's recommendation to approve the scheme. Officers were asked to return with possible reasons for refusal. Since that committee, the applicant has revised the scheme with the upper floors of the pub now remaining as ancillary space. So the proposal is now for the development of a block of 6 flats in the rear garden of the Rhubarb Tavern, the restoration of the existing building and retention of the upper floors in ancillary use for the public house function, along with landscaping and tree planting. Just see if I can get my slide to move on. There we go. Committee resolved to ask officers to report back with potential refusal reasons relating to policies DM5 and DM6, and this is covered in the officers' report to committee. In addition to removing the alterations to the upper floors of the pub and retaining them as ancillary accommodation, the revised proposal also increases the proposed size of the beer garden to allow for 54 covers, which is up from 36. In order to increase biodiversity, officers have also included a landscaping plan condition in the event of an approval to ensure that the proposed planting of trees and shrubs is delivered. So, looking at the site location, again, the pub is located on this. Can't get my mouse to move. There we go. So the pub is located here. It's a 3-storey property at 30 Queen Anne Road in the Lawrence Hill ward of Bristol. It's been in use as a public house since Victorian times, though it's been vacant for more than 5 years and has fallen into a considerable state of disrepair. The site lies adjacent to a 3-storey residential development known as Queen Anne Mews to the east and is opposite Barton Hill School, which is also currently vacant. A railway line runs immediately to the west of the site with a designated wild corridor on the embankment. The rear of the site includes a large, partially paved garden and is situated next to a public right-of-way which has been closed off for several years. The property is locally listed but not in a conservation area. And here is an aerial view of the pub building here with the garden, Queen Anne Mews, which has been built along the boundary of the garden, and then the railway line and the embankment, which is the wildlife corridor here. These are some site photos taken from a site visit last year showing the outside of the pub. I mean, you can see some of the graffiti on the outside in the overgrown gardens. Inside the pub, there is severe damage that was caused, I believe, by squatters, which includes looting of pipework, service runs. There's damage to the floors, holes in the floors and ceilings, panelling in the walls, as well as damage to the bathrooms, kitchen and upper floors. There was also significant damage from damp and disrepair that we saw during the site visit. So this is the existing site plan. You can see the 2 outbuildings that are proposed to be demolished are in red here. The rest of the pub is here, and this is the garden area, and this is the side access. This was the proposed site plan that went to committee on the 24th of January, with the block of flats to be built in the gardens and new tree planting and shrubs in what was a previously just lawned area, with the proposed beer garden here. The new revised site plan, if I just increases the size of the outdoor beer garden and moves up the bike shed or the bike store for residents that's proposed. So this ups the number of covers and seated area from 36 to 54, I believe. And then again, you still have the service area, the parking, EV charging points. The pub itself is now retained as it is at the moment with the upper floors to be kept. And then you have the proposed elevations for the flats to be built in the gardens, which were based on pre-application advice and have gone through the previous iterations without any concerns from design officers. So the application was originally called in by the ward councillor for the reasons shown on the screen. There would be no loss of the asset of community value status by approving this application. It is not within the remit of planning to determine how a business operates or what model is used by the operator. The loss of the upper floors has now been removed from the plans and will remain as part of the pub, and there have been 3 rounds of public consultation during the course of the application to date. Of the 2 further rounds of consultation, the first one generated no responses, which we thought was slightly odd, given the high number of objections and comments we received initially. So we conducted a 3rd round of consultation, which expired on the 18th of July, and this generated 20 representations, of which 12 were objections, 3 were in support of the revised application, and 5 comments were neutral. The 24th of January committee requested officers provide refusal reason based on policies DM5 and 6 in relation to the loss of the pub and the garden. As there is no loss of the pub and only a portion of the rear garden, a refusal reason based on policy DM6 would not be possible. A refusal reason has been drafted based on DM5 and is included in the officer's report, although this we feel is unlikely to stand up to appeal. The key issue is the principle of development, which is for the retention of the pub in its current form now, and the loss of a portion of the garden to create a new residential block at the rear. There were no objections with regard to design, transport, the public right-of-way team, network rail, conservation, nature conservation or land contamination. And to ensure the retention of the pub, conditions are proposed in the event of an approval which removes any potential for future permitted development rights to convert the building into any other use without express planning permission. The applicant maintains that the building is in such a poor state of repair that additional development is required to restore the pub and create space that offers a pub operation a viable chance. It is evident that the situation has worsened since January, and photos have been sent in to neighbourhood enforcement showing additional decline of the building. In contrast, CAMRA have objected and said that the pub would be viable if would not be viable if the development is approved. Given the two arguments, officers commissioned an independent pub viability survey and requested 4 scenarios be reviewed. The revised scheme, with the upper floors of the pub retained for landlord accommodation, was considered as scenario 3 and was found to offer a viable business proposal to a future operator. The report stated that an investment of over £900,000 was required to bring the pub back into a fit state and to be operational, and that was based on costs at the summer of 2023. In terms of the current application, it was found that once restored, the proposed pub would be a viable business opportunity and could offer a profitably run public house. A large number of objections focused on the lack of accommodation for a future landlord, and the revised scheme does provide the same landlord accommodation above the pub as has previously been the case. With regards to the garden, a large number of objections relate to the loss of the garden and harm to the vitality of the pub, which could use the space, according to the objections, for live music gigs and other events. Historically, there have been complaints about noise from the beer garden, specifically between 2006 to 2011, and since then, the development of flats along the boundary wall of the garden has been built. This would make it very difficult for a temporary events licence to be granted, or for any licence to sell alcohol on the premises would likely require limitations on use of the garden, particularly at later times in the evening. The revised proposal significantly increases the space provided for the beer garden compared to the proposal that came before committee in January, with now 54 covers as opposed to 36 previously, so an approximate 50% increase in seating under the revised scheme. I also need to inform committee that on Monday of this week, an email was sent to the Nature Conservation Officer to say that there have been slow worms found living in part of the garden. Photos were submitted showing a slow worm, although there were no distinguishing landmark features to show this was within the garden. We've spoken to the Nature Conservation Officer, and they have requested an additional condition for precautionary method of working to be attached to any approval, to ensure that the safety of any slow worms or other protected species that have made the garden their home whilst it's fallen into disrepair are looked after and are safely moved back to the wildlife corridor next door. It should also be noted that if planning permission is not granted, then the garden could be cleared without any need for planning permission, and we wouldn't have any ability to control the safety of those animals through the planning system. The Nature Conservation Officer has also confirmed that there is no bat survey required. So in order to ensure the public house is restored and brought back into use, phasing plan conditions have been prepared to ensure that the pub can be restored and marketed for occupation and reopening within 12 months of the completion of the flats at the rear. The application would retain the public house and bring it back into use, create 6 new homes in Bristol, and is considered to be policy compliant. Given the above, and as set out in the officers' report to committee, officers are recommending approval of this application subject to the conditions proposed.
So now we move on to our next section, which will be the questions to the officers. Is there anybody that would like to ask any questions? From the councillors, that is. Sarah?
Yeah, I've just got a couple. I mean, firstly, I'm really pleased to see that the owners of the site have pledged to reopen the pub. Can I ask, in terms of planning, how much weight we can put on that? what enforcements we can put on that, and just because I think the worst scenario is that that pub doesn't reopen and the community, you know, forever loses that asset. So I think that would be the biggest question for me.
Yeah, so we can include conditions that require a method statement for how the pub will be restored, because it's a locally listed building. So we can request a method statement explaining what repairs are required and how it's going to be repaired, be a pre-commencement condition. So no development of the flats can take place until we have that. We can then have conditions to ensure that within or prior to the first occupation of the flats, we have a signed contract that is provided to the council by the applicant to show that they have appointed a contractor to repair the pub and carry out the works within a specified timetable, and a condition that that must be completed within 12 months of first occupation of the flats. So that gives us some control to ensure that the pub, all of the works to restore the pub and bring the building back into use can be done and will be done alongside or soon after the funds are raised through the development of the flats.
Sorry, and just to add to that, there's also a pre-commencement condition that we are now recommending, which essentially requires before any development is undertaken for a plan to be submitted to us, which outlines the works that would be undertaken to the pub as well. So there is the potential there to essentially control this at each stage of the development of the flats.
Zoe.
To kind of further my colleague's point, there are representations that the renovations will be done within 1 year. I suppose I would like to know that if in the event that these renovations aren't completed within that time frame, what then happens?
So there are a number of trigger points here. So as I said, there is the pre-commencement condition, which requires us to have the details of the works that will be proposed. Then, as the case officer said, before the flats can be occupied, we would also like to see details of the contract to undertake those works. And then there is the condition also within 12 months. So there are a number of kind of trigger points there, which they would need to comply with. In the event, though, they don't comply and a complaint is received, we would have to investigate that as an enforcement matter and then consider what action's appropriate.
And do you have any idea of what those range of responses may look like?
I think it's hard to say until you know that situation arises. But other than to say, I think sort of with the conditions that we are recommending, we feel it's kind of as tight as we can be to ensure that those works progress as the applicant is indicating to us that they will.
So you don't have any idea at this stage, which is fine, but I wanted to clarify.
Are there any other questions? Serena.
I just wondered if I'm assuming that CAMRA advised on the council's own practice note on pubs. Is that correct? If that's the case, they are the experts on viability. Surely their view and their objection would carry substantial weight?
So in terms of DM6 and the practice note, that relates to the loss of a pub. And on this occasion, the application is to retain the pub. So in terms of the costings, CAMRA don't have, as far as I'm aware, haven't had a survey done of the pub or are aware of all of the damage, and I don't believe that they've been in and actually surveyed it. I know that they dispute the costs that the applicant has put forward for the cost of renovation, and also disputed the costs from the viability study that we as a council commissioned to look into the viability of the pub and what was required. But in terms of what weight we give it, DM6 doesn't apply because there's no loss of a pub.
Annie first and then Jenny. Sorry, Annie had her hand up earlier.
Thank you. So I've got some questions around viability as well. The first one was, I note that the applicant said that no experienced publicans have come forward with an offer. Has it been marketed in the last 5 years? And if so, how was it marketed and for how much?
I believe it was marketed, but there were issues with squatters. I mean, this goes back to the previous report, so I'm going from memory. But I believe we did have a marketing report that said that there were no offers of a value that was fair for the property. There were interested parties and negotiations were ongoing. I believe at the point in January, there had been negotiations that I think may have fallen through by that point. And as far as I'm aware, no other offers have come in since January.
Thank you. I'm thinking about, I don't know if you're able to answer, but do we know if the level that it was marketed, thinking about the practice note on DM6, about it having to be marketed at a price that is correct for a pub, not in terms of anticipation of any future value after development? So what kind of value was it marketed at?
Again, because there's no loss of the pub, DM6 isn't really relevant, so it's not something that we would have continued to look into. But also, the financial side of things, it isn't really a material planning consideration. We've got a planning application before us for a development, and we have to assess that according to policy.
Okay. So I've been looking at...
Go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. So I was looking at the viability report, and in the viability report, which was from Savills, it goes through 4 different scenarios, and in all of those scenarios, the pub is viable, even with the refurb works, but it does put significant weight on the importance of the garden in that space for the viability and the amount of covers that the garden can provide. So I can pull it up for you to find out where it is. Hold on. Because I know I can see your faces. Where is it? Hold on. Yeah, so it's on page 13 of the viability report. And it says, it kind of notes the importance of the sizable tradable garden, and some of the scenarios there are sort of going through sort of how much income it could receive as a pub, and that is, some of it's tied to garden covers as well. So I was wondering how much weight we can give to that viability document.
Right, so the viability document, the 4 scenarios, one was to retain the pub as it is without any development in the garden, and it was found that is not viable. So the 3 additional scenarios were the application that came through last time, which was for the upper floors to be converted into 2 flats along with the 6 dwellings in the garden. Scenario 3, I believe, is the one that we now have, which is that the upper floors are retained for the landlord as ancillary accommodation above the pub. And I think scenario 4 was conversion of the upper floors into event space. So from memory, the garden space that we have now, by the loss of the garden, I think it was suggested that £1,500 a week in potential revenue could be lost. Because the number of covers have increased by about 50%, we would therefore expect that to be about £750. But at the same time, the landlord would now be able to live above the pub and wouldn't be paying rent elsewhere. So actually, I think this actually is as good as the previous option in terms of viability for the pub, if that answers the question.
It doesn't, because I've got the viability report in front of me, and it says, under scenario 1, what it actually says is that no ongoing operator is going to spend the sort of £1 million for a profit of £45,000. Therefore, it's unviable. It doesn't say it's unviable. It's a judgment on whether or not an operator is willing to spend £1 million on refurbing it. And I asked this question last time it came to committee, but is the amount of money that a refurb is going to cost a material consideration? I can tell you your answer from last time, or you can give
Is it a material consideration? I mean, I think in terms of what the applicant is proposing here is, as we've heard from them, they are saying that the capital that will be achieved as a result of the flats, they are willing to use to put towards the improvements to the pub. As far as the planning assessment is concerned, we think that we've gone as far as we can in terms of the conditions that are recommended, in terms of kind of linking those two things, so that what's actually intended will happen. So insofar as kind of that's the context for the application, that is material.
It's interesting because last time when I asked that question, the answer was no, it's not a material consideration. So was it material consideration last time or not? And is it a material consideration this time or not? Because for continuity...
So technically, it's not a material planning consideration, but in the overall balance in trying to bring the pub back into use and restore and refurbish a locally listed building and an asset for the community, asset community value, we have to look at the potential for that to actually happen, and as planners do the best we can to give the best chance of the pub coming back and not falling into further disrepair. So when we look at the planning balance, whilst it's not a material consideration, we have to be minded about whether or not, when we look at a decision, we're going to be able to make a decision that's actually deliverable. And the likelihood is that without this development, the pub coming back into use is not going to happen. And in order to bring that pub back into use, we have gone as far as I think is possible in the use of conditions to ensure that we understand that there is a desire to keep the garden, but if keeping the garden as part of a derelict pub that is not open to the public is viewed against having a smaller beer garden in an open, vibrant community pub, then that is kind of where we'd like things to go, and we're doing all we can with the conditions to ensure that the pub is brought back into use.
But to clarify,
Annie,
can I just...
someone else now to have a turn.
Okay, I'll
Jenny?
pass to Jenny then.
So I didn't understand the argument for why DO6 doesn't apply, because in the context, so the context you're saying is that it doesn't, that the application doesn't involve the loss of a pub. But the argument that I hear from camera is that this development will mean that the pub will never come back into use because it won't be a viable business. And I think there's a tension between those two things, and I don't really know how to put more weight onto camera's position, which is that, well, the policy should apply because there is going to be a pub lost if we do this development, versus the arguments that you made in the paper. Can you just clarify that?
So the situation at the moment is that we have a pub that's been closed for over 5 years. Prior to that, the landlord couldn't pay the rent because it wasn't viable in its current form. The pub has now fallen into a significant state of disrepair. It has had squatters. The costs for bringing the pub back into use are increasing all the time. We've had this planning application, which, yes, cameras say they think the loss of the pub would mean it wouldn't be a viable pub. We have an applicant who says without development, the pub isn't going to come back into use, but with development, it will be viable. And in order to assess the argument, or to kind of find a position on that argument, we as a planning department commissioned an independent viability study which looked at all of this and said the only way to make the pub viable is through development. and then gave us three options or three scenarios that could be of. One was the one that came to committee in January. This was scenario 3, and then the fourth is for event space in the upper floors. And that report said this is viable and is likely to be an attractive proposition to a landlord who wants to take on the pub and would be able to run it profitably.
Thanks. I think that does clarify whether or not DO6 applies. So I guess I wanted to talk about the community asset aspect of this. And I suppose, actually, before that, I'll just quickly ask about the public right-of-way. There are a few submissions that say that it would be lost, but from how I read it, it wouldn't be lost. I think that the boundary of the site that was being developed doesn't cross the public right-of-way, but that, I'm not sure.
Okay, so the public right-of-way has been blocked off for many, many years. I believe it runs into a brick wall at the back of an industrial estate now. It's just that the argument that it could be reopened simply isn't plausible because it is literally a road to nowhere. So by opening up the gate and allowing that bit of the public right-of-way effectively is opening up an area to crime. It's not surveilled, it's a concern, and the public right-of-way team are more than happy for it to be extinguished. I can defer over to Pip if you want to speak. Pip.
To put it into perspective, there's safer routes to walk around that area, lit on the footway around the area. So our colleagues in the public rights of way team thought that, in road safety terms and in an area where we want people walking safely, it would be, on balance, not a huge loss to safe walking environments in the area. So that's why we didn't object to that part. Although generally we would support the maintenance of, but this was closed because of antisocial behaviour in the past. So the information that we as a council closed it, the Highway Authority closed it on the police request. And so far the antisocial behaviour has still continued in and out of that area. I hope that's useful.
Yeah, thank you. I have seen pictures from the community that they've cleared that of brambles now, but and there was some urinals that they found, historic urinals, but I'm not sure whether I should give that more weight than the fact that there's actually probably going to be antisocial behaviour there, especially at the back of the pub. So that's something I will think about. And then, yes, I had one more question, which was about the uniqueness of the pub garden in the area. So my experience of Barton Hill is that it's a lot of tower blocks, a lot of grass verges that aren't really your garden. And there's a few parks, but that's not your garden. You can't sit out, have a nice drink, and your kids are playing in a contained area. There are very few places that, especially people who live in tower blocks, can do that, have just a little place for their kids to run around while the grown-ups are all chilling out together. And I don't really know how much of an impact removing the gardeny part of the garden it's not covers, it's like kids can run around here, or we can potentially have a music event or something like that. That I feel like it is actually a pretty unique space, especially for people who can't access private gardens. And I don't know how much weight to give to that, given that some amount of outside space is retained, but it's not like, I don't know, it's still a pub. Like, I don't know.
I think that's actually it. It's still, at the moment, part of the pub. It's not public realm. It's not open space. It is a private garden, albeit one that in a functional pub could be opened up and used by children or for any other reasons. But it's been closed for many years now. So it's not that this would be taken away from the current situation. It's not there now. And in order to bring the pub back, we have kind of accepted that the development at the rear is required to bring the rest of the pub back, and it would still have some outdoor space for up to 54 covers, but so there would still be a beer garden. On top of that, the way that the design works shields the flats on Queen Anne Mews from additional noise, because you've got the bike store there and the wall across, so it actually acts as a barrier to sound that has been historically a serious harm to the amenity of the residents living right along the boundary of the beer garden. So again, in the planning balance, we've tried to find something that works as best we can for all of the interested parties, for the pub itself, for the community, for the residents. And as I said earlier, using that garden for kind of music events or live events outdoors is highly unlikely because of the impact that would have on the residents that directly overlook the garden.
Al?
Yeah, I would just like to ask, what percentage of these flats would be classed like as affordable housing?
So of the flats, because there are fewer than 10 dwellings, you don't have to meet an affordable housing target.
Okay.
So in this instance, it's not something that we would be able to assess or be able to request.
Sure, that's great. Thank you.
Serena, thank you.
Yeah, just asking about the new development. Say this application was to be approved. How can noise from the pub garden be mitigated for new residents? It seems to me, looking at the plans, it's going to be quite a crammed space. So you've got the beer garden, you've got more covers, you've got these new flats. I'm just wondering about the noise issue for those new residents.
So the historic noise issues relating from the pub garden to the existing dwellings would be mitigated against by reducing the size of the garden and boxing it in. The new flats would be subject to agent of change principles. So they would be built on the provision that they are aware that there is an active pub in close proximity. They would need to be told in advance that you would not be able to complain about any noise, and that would be in the contracts effectively, and the same as any other agent of change principle developments that we have in the city.
Annie?
Thank you. Will there be, what's the soundproofing levels? Yeah, that are going to be provided not only for the garden, but also the railway line is quite close as well. Because otherwise, agent of change, I love it and I want it on everything, but it works well when the soundproofing is there, because otherwise it's just a miserable existence for the people who live there.
Yeah. So we have a noise impact assessment, and there is a condition attached to ensure that suitable mitigation measures are in place to ensure that the quality of noise insulation provides an acceptable level of accommodation for the occupants of those flats. So again, that's secured by condition.
Zoe?
So if I'm being, completely honest, the actual refurbishment of the pub sounds decent, but there's so little information that I'm finding on the actual flats, and I'm finding it hard to believe that, say you're moving into a place and it's got a pub right beneath you, that it's not going to be affordable. You're paying essentially an unaffordable amount to live next to a pub, which, for some people, they very well may enjoy that. But in terms of like the affordability, we know nothing about this. So are they going to be 1-bedroom flats? Are they going to be 2-bedroom? Are they being rented out? Are they being sold off? You know, are they going to have, you know, solar panels? We know nothing about the actual flats, it seems. And I appreciate that, you know, the most contentious bit of this is the pub, and I appreciate that, and that's why most of the effort in this has gone to that. But I'm now just, where's the information on the flats?
It's all in the report. The 6 flats are 1-bedroom, 2-person flats that meet space standards. The flats above the pub, originally it was 1 3-bed, 5-person and 1 2-bed, 4-person flats, but that now remains ancillary accommodation for the landlord to occupy. So it's all set out clearly in the reports. The flats are all dual aspect, have natural ventilation. The plans are quite standard for any planning application. So I'm not entirely sure.
I've blown through it. It is there. I have seen it. They're 1-bedroom flats.
Yeah, 1-bedroom, the 6 1-bedroom, 2-person flats, and the 2 larger flats that would have been created above the pub are now being retained as ancillary accommodation
that
for
was
the
a bit
landlord.
confusing in the writing that it was from the previous one. Serena.
Just to echo, really, I was going to say this anyway, and then Ali was saying it just does seem a little bit of a miserable existence in terms of the amount of cramming that's going on to that site. So what I was trying to get my head round.
Sorry to interrupt, but aren't we actually engaging in debate, not asking you a question?
No, I'm just about to ask a question. Yep. So what I don't understand is, I'm just trying to query how the covers and the beer garden, the amount of covers has gone up, and that the same design, the same flats remain. You see what I mean?
They pushed the proposed bike store back to create more land there, which comes out of the private garden for one of the flats. So the flats, one of the 6 flats has a private garden, and the other 5 flats have a larger communal garden. So there will still be plenty of garden space. It will just be for the occupants of the flats rather than an open lawned garden. And within that, there is tree planting, shrubs, and we will be conditioning a landscape plan to ensure that we get good biodiversity increase. So in terms of, it basically the flats will be built, but then next to the flats or surrounding the flats, you've got garden space relating to those flats to provide actually quite a good level of outdoor amenity space for future occupiers.
Are there any other questions? I only had one question, which was something about the heating, because we know that we're getting warmer and warmer every summer, and some people would say that taking away the land, a bit of green space, although that's debatable how green that space is, would then create more heating because we're building closer together. Is there some sort of mitigation or some sort of thought gone into that?
Yeah, absolutely. So the garden in its current form is simply open lawn and hard surfacing. As part of the development, we're bringing in, or we're asking the developer to bring in trees, shrubs, planting, which will be secured by the landscaping plan, so that we can ensure that we increase biodiversity, create some shade where there is none at the moment. And of course, the flats themselves, through the sustainability statement, would reduce, or it would have at least a 20% reduction in carbon emissions compared to the existing. So yeah, that plenty of thought's gone into that, and actually this would create more shading than there is currently, and more biodiversity.
Thank you. Sorry, Ellie.
Sorry, one hopefully last question. So we've obviously got the condition about the flats being, the pub being developed within 12 months of the flats being started. Is there being completed, sorry. Is there any way that we can ensure that that work gets done in a timely manner? Because obviously if the flats don't get started within the next 2-3 years, and the pub's going to fall even further into deterioration, and then we're back where we started, potentially.
We can't force a developer to implement a planning permission from the start. So if work hasn't commenced within 3 years, the planning application would lapse, in the same as any other planning application.
Annie.
I've got a question about ecology reports. there's been some public representation saying that isn't one. I couldn't see one on the planning portal. Have we carried out one, or has one been carried out?
The Nature Conservation Officer said that one wasn't required. The application was for a garden that was effectively hard surfaced with some lawn. There wasn't really a lot of ecology there. You've got the wildlife corridor next door, but the actual site itself, it was deemed it wasn't necessary.
Because I don't know if you spotted or anybody else spotted, but there's representation in the public forum about slow worms. So I was just wondering.
Yeah, I mentioned that in my presentation, and that was made to the Nature Conservation Officer, and it was discussed with them, and they were happy that a precautionary method of working condition could be put on. So when there is some site clearance in order to prepare for development, any protected species found would be reported and safely moved to a place of safety, presumably back in the wildlife corridor that they've most likely migrated from. And the concern, of course, is that if we don't grant planning permission, that could be cleared just by anyone could go in and clear that land, and there'd be no planning mechanism for protection of those species. But by putting that condition on approval, we would effectively be ensuring that the site is cleared in a proper way, and that any wildlife found there would be moved safely back into the wildlife corridor, and wouldn't be able to get back into the building site.
So a worm sort of safe repatriation scheme.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Any other questions from anybody? Shall we move to the second part of the debate phase, please? Thank you. So anybody, Eddie?
2.5 years ago, this committee determined the Fulford Road Elms in Hartcliffe. We actually felt that it was appropriate to have housing conditions there, but members did express concerns about viability and loss to the community of the pub. As a consequence, officers are to be congratulated for working with CAMRA on improved viability schemes, which are, as the officer said, incorporated in this application. Although clearly, as Ben has said, since we're not losing a pub if we are minded to approve this, doesn't apply in the same way. In January, we considered this. There were several issues of concern to members, and I'm impressed that both the officer and the applicant have sought to bring us closer together. If we choose to approve this, not only are we revitalising a locally listed heritage asset, we're actually keeping a community pub. We're giving jobs, but we're also bringing accommodation desperately needed to the local community. All of that seems positive, but plus we've heard the big garden will be enhanced. We're seeing new landscaping, new tree planting. All of that is positive. Frankly, I think many communities around Bristol would give their IT for a scheme like this. They are naturally concerned about losing a pub community heart. But if this is a way to keep it and have all those benefits you've outlined, it seems to me this is a scheme we ought to support. More to the point, and whilst I appreciate it's not technically a material planning consideration, in my view, if members were minded to actually refuse this, it would almost certainly be overturned at appeal and likely costs awarded against us and paid for by the ever-shrinking planning budget. So my support for this is certainly on the cards, and I will be voting for it this evening.
Thank you, Eddie. Anyone else, please? Jenny? Zoe, sorry, Jenny.
I would like to second Councillor Eddy.
We're not at that stage yet. Thank you, Jenny.
Yeah. I think I'm very aware that my biggest issue is that I'm voting for something not really on planning grounds. I really want to just have the pub come back. That's just what I want. And I'm kind of hearing from the community that they want one type of pub, and hearing from the developer that they want another type of pub. And it's simply, this is my very first planning, and I'm like, oh, this is really hard. Yeah, so I think but the key point is that I feel as though getting the pub back into use is only going to be done if we approve something from this applicant. And I feel that the loss of community asset is more likely to occur if we keep turning down planning applications from this applicant. I'm not really sure if that's like proper material planning. That's right? That sounds right? Yeah, I'm getting nods. Good. Yeah, I think I don't have enough strong reasons to vote against it, because I came in here thinking surely that viability report that the council commissioned is worth less than the opinion of CAMRA. But I think that argument versus the argument of, well, it's not going to happen, I think that's the central difficulty for me. I did have something else to say, but I haven't written it down, so I suppose that's where I'll stop. Sorry.
Thank you. Sarah?
Thank you. Yeah. I mean, it's always really tough when we have these schemes come in. I think I make the joke every time that we only actually get the tough ones here because of delegated authority. These guys take all the easy ones from us. So there are always ones that do require quite a lot of consideration, a lot of, there are quite often a lot of objections and opinions from the community. And so it is one that I have put a lot of thought in, have asked the questions, have listened to. Coming in, my two sort of biggest concerns of the scheme were that, the pub, we'd have a sort of slightly wishy-washy promise of a pub. We'd approve these flats, they'd get built, and in 2 years' time, we're back again approving 2 more floors of flats in the pub. So the fact that there are some more concrete enforcement points on this is something that has swayed me, because as I said at the beginning, the worst case scenario is that this pub does not reopen. That is, I think, a very important part of the community, and it absolutely needs to happen. The other thing is I was always concerned when we have flats and a venue next to each other, the potential for noise, the potential for conflict, and again, thank you for asking questions about that, to kind of ease my concerns with that as well, that there are mitigations, there are specs in place. So I think on balance of listening to everything that's been asked, considering the needs of the community and considering the sort of other options if we were to turn this down today, I think I will be voting for the scheme.
Thank you. Anyone else would like to contribute to the Ellie? Sorry, Ellie.
All right. So the point that Jenny was going to make initially is about the phasing and how we can make that more concrete, sort of more to make sure that it does move in the way that we need it to move. I think that's something that is of concern. But I think the things that everybody said, this is a really tricky one. There's a lot. I had a whole list of things that were worrying me, and I've gradually ticked them off. But I'm also really aware that there's a really strong voice from the community here, and I think we need to really acknowledge that it's not easy to come to these things and to have your voice heard, and we need to really respect that and acknowledge that. having been kind of on that side myself once or twice, I know it's, you know, it's not easy. And so it makes it extra hard for us as well, knowing that those feelings are really strong and that this has been going on for quite a long time. But given all the conditions that have been put in place, I think it's going to be very difficult to find a reason to, unfortunately, go with what the community want. I think that's the nature of planning, unfortunately.
Is there anyone else that would like to? Annie, thank you.
Thank you. I sat on this when it came to committee back in January as well. So I appreciate a lot of the work that's been done. It still doesn't quite allay my concerns and fears about this application. I think particularly around the viability. So I'm very swayed by CAMRA's representations on it, particularly with the viability report. Yes, it says that viability on scenario 1 of keeping the garden as it is, it's a 45,000 per annum profit, which is the highest profit on all of the scenarios. However, it's viewed as unviable on the basis of the cost of refurb. But the cost of refurb itself is debated and challenged. Because the cost of the refurb isn't a material consideration in itself, therefore I'm leaning towards putting a little weight behind the fact that actually the viability report that is independently provided says it is viable, most viable with the garden as it is. And also that it's based on not the trading history of the pub, but on industry knowledge itself. And it doesn't take into account the future trading presented by Silverthorn Lane, which again isn't a material consideration either, but I think we could make a sort of educated guess about the added custom that the Silverthorn Lane would bring to that pub in the future. So, and essentially my concern is that even though DM6 itself hasn't been triggered by this, it has such a strong potential of the loss of the pub by stealth, because what I don't want to see is coming back in a few years' time, actually it's the pub that we've lost, and because it's not viable anymore, and then we will have a viability report that says it's not viable because they haven't been able to get anybody to be that tenant, or maybe they have and it's not viable because of everything else, and they've lost all of their useful, very valuable outside space. So for that reason, I'm not going to be voting for the officer recommendation. Sorry, Ben. But saying that as well, I do appreciate the conditions that you have put on it. And so if it is approved today, I really hope that the officers are really hot on making sure that every single one of those obligations are met and there's no sliding back of those conditions and those planning obligations by the applicant as it comes forward. Thanks.
Chairman, could I respectfully move actually approval subject to conditions?
Just one more from Zoe, and then if everybody's... Oh, sorry, Serena wants to go as well. So Zoe first, Serena next.
Sorry, thank you.
I really worry.
Zoe.
Oh, sorry.
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 I have come to this chamber with an open mind. I'm a person that wants revitalisation of our community spaces and more homes to ease the current housing crisis. At the same time, I understand the concerns of residents. There have been questions around the right-of-way, the preservation of wildlife, and that have emigrated from the wildlife corridor, and whether the communal garden would be appropriate for families with small children. With representations that the right-of-way leads to an unsafe dead end anyway, that due diligence will be done to return wildlife to the corridor, and that the garden will be separated by the bike space and only be accessible by residents, and that fundamentally the Rhubarb Tavern will reopen and we will have more housing, I will be voting for this.
Serena.
I'm less clear than Zoe. I've been struggling with this and looking through all the papers very closely and hearing all the arguments today. And I was only really listening and thinking about this where my worry is still there, I'm afraid. I'm still anxious that this will be loss of a pub by stealth, and I think it would be very sad for the community. And the community's made very, very strong arguments. They know their community. They know what works. They know there's a demand. for me, I think that the thing that seals it is CAMRA. They are the experts on viability in pubs, and they put a very strong objection in. I do worry also for future residents. I know I really respect what you've done with conditions and then what Ali said as well. I think you've tried your best to sign, seal and deliver this, but I think it will lead also to fairly poor quality accommodation for new residents. So juggling that with a beer garden where, you know, ideally you'd like to be noisy and let your hair down with flats isn't a happy relationship, I don't think. So on the strength of it, I'm just cynical that, sorry to row back, I'm cynical that this won't get delivered, this pub, in the long run, and I think we'll be back in a few years' time looking for an application to have the whole site as residential. We have got, I know it's not material consideration, we have got Silverthorne Lane coming down the tracks. That is going to provide more demand for a pub. It is going to allay the housing need. I know you can't take it into consideration at this stage, so I am minded to refuse, I'm afraid. But I do want to thank you for all the work you've put in. So I'm really struggling here. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I think we can now move to I've forgotten the words that you said. We can move the motion forward to say that whether for a mind of acceptance of the officers.
I'm able just to clarify that that's also subject to the inclusion of the two conditions which are on page 37 of the report. So this relates to the work to the public house that we've mentioned, and also an additional condition which would be no occupation of the flats shall take place until the details relating to the contract for the work has also been submitted. So it'd be subject to those three additional conditions.
Did you say also the additional one about the slowworm protection measures?
Indeed, yes. And
that one
yeah.
as well. Okay, so do we approve this? Can I have someone to second us, please? You seconded, thank you. So we move to a vote, please. So can we have, I'll start with Annie.
Against.
Serena.
Against.
Ellie.
For.
Jenny.
For.
Eddie.
For.
Sarah.
For.
Al.
For.
Zoe.
For.
And I, Katya, for. Thank you. So the motion, the approval is passed. Thank you very much. I have to say thank you for everybody for coming, and I'm sorry that it didn't go to some people a way some people wanted or expected it. I certainly hope we have a lovely pub in the future. I have visited the pub many years when it was open. I'm not going to say much about it. I'll reserve my remarks on that. And thank you. I'll have ended the meeting for now. Is it? They do? Yeah.